When I started to write Kashmir to Haridwar, which is actually a series of stories based on my ancestry, on my family memoirs, anecdotes, and the history of the very remote Shivalik region from where my ancestors came, my every trip back home, it started to become like an exploratory expedition. So during one such trip last year, I ended up discovering the story of a very important but tragically a forgotten Dogra warrior. So we were actually, my father and I, we were on our way to see this village where my ancestors lived about 2 centuries ago. And a very beautiful hilly region, thickly forested. The road was narrow, and we made our way through this, way which was broken at multiple points by these very kinetic springs and little waterfalls. And at a certain point, we actually had to, park our vehicle, and we had to trek because there was no route going uphill. So you can see here, you see this. A narrow route. So these are the kind of routes which you find in the mountains. And after a certain point, there was no way to go uphill. So we had to actually pass through people's homes and, their fields. And you can see here, home in the village. And as we saw my ancestral place and we were coming back, we came back to this small market, with just two shops, and there was a lonely shopkeeper over there. And we just casually, started to talk as we generally do, in the countryside. People are quite friendly. And I asked him, I said, is there, anybody of importance, historical significance that I can meet? And he said, nearby there is a home and there are a few old people over there. Why don't you go over there? And they have some old pictures. And, so we just casually set off. And it was not nearby, it was actually about 10 kilometers away. And we came to this hamlet. It was actually not a hamlet, but it was like a cluster of homes belonging to the same clan. And one house stood out. It was a beautiful, well preserved old mud wood house. And that day, I didn't know that I'm actually entering the home of General Hoshiara Singh, who was a very important, significant Dogra warrior of the mid 19th century. But for some reasons, his story is forgotten. So you see here, this is General Hoshiara Singh's home, which he himself built 2 centuries ago, and but fourth and fifth generations of his, they still have preserved it. So as we entered the home, you can see here, this is his home. You find these kind of homes in the mountains. His family, there were two old women over there. They took out some of his weapons. So you can see here, it's a battle axe. It's like a Thor's axe. Today you can't imagine that somebody would be fighting battles with these kind of weapons, but that's the case. And they told me that they have a lot of his weapons, but the family follows some warrior tradition. So during the year, they actually take out these weapons for some rituals and stuff like that. So all the weapons, they were not out. There were only few of them, and they showed me these. They also showed me a Victorian sword. You can see the video here. So the Victorian sword, if you see, you can actually, see it from the time from the mid 19th century. You can see the emblem of the British crown on it. And this sword also belonged to General Hoshiara Singh. So when I landed over there, it was very surprising. First of all, accidentally, I had entered into the home of this Dogra warrior. He was a general, and then, they were showing me his weapons. Some of those weapons were, quite medieval-like, and some of those weapons were from the Victorian era. Also, I saw the temple of the family, and there was a lamp in the family and a Khand Jyoti in the temple, which was started by General Hoshiara Singh's wife. And it has been maintained for the past over 160 years. So obviously there was something in the story which was fascinating, but the family also, doesn't really know what happened to him. And today I'm going to share whatever I discovered about General Hoshiara Singh. So there are three aspects. First of all, through General Hoshiara Singh's story, we can delve into Dogra kingdom's expansion during mid 19th century, and we can discover a few things about him over there. Plus, we can also understand the context in which this story has happened, and we can understand the importance of the Dogra kingdom in the 19th century. And as we go about the story, you'll also get glimpses of, Dogra culture of the Shivalik Hills, which is quite unique, which is an identity of its own, but generally not known to the people outside. And most importantly, we can discover something about the Dogra warrior tradition, which was a very unique warrior tradition. So General Hoshiara Singh was actually active during the mid 19th century. So that was the time when the Dogra kingdom, it was, under Gulab Singh, who was the first Dogra Maharaja. Surprisingly, there is no recorded history left about General Hoshiara Singh. So the only way to actually understand who he was and what he did and why he was important, for that we have to actually lay the context. So if you see 1846, after the Treaty of Amritsar happened, which means when the Valley of Kashmir was given to Maharaja Gulab Singh by the British for 75 lakh rupees, there were other territories which were also given to Maharaja Gulab Singh under the Treaty of Amritsar. And one of the territory was Gilgit. Now, interestingly, before 1846, 25 years before that, Gilgit had seen 5 different bloody dynastic changes. So that means in those period of 25 years, you had, some chieftain in this region being killed by someone and that being killed by someone, and, like that, consequently, there were 5 dynastic changes. So when the Dogras came in, the Dogras got Gilgit from the Sikhs. The Sikhs, because Sikhs were ruling over Kashmir for over 2 decades when the Treaty of Amritsar was signed. So the Sikhs were present in Gilgit. And, after the Sikhs, it's the Dogras who came to Gilgit. So the Dogras didn't inherit a very happy place. They actually inherited very turmoiled frontiers. And it's very important to understand that, because these frontiers, they were actually a very geostrategic spot even at that point of time, because it was at Gilgit that the British Empire, the Russian Empire, and the Chinese, it was a tri-junction between these. And Gilgit was sitting, in that tri-junction, and it was the Dogras who got to rule over that, that territory. And around Gilgit, there were various other small territories, like Chitral was there, Yasin was there, Hunza, Nagar was there. So these frontiers, they were always in turmoil. So some of the other conflict, internal fights, and, son killing father and father killing son and cousins killing each other, for power. So the Dogras didn't really inherit a very happy place. They actually inherited a very turmoiled place from the Sikhs. So in 1853, the Dogras were actually present in Gilgit when they had to face a war, and the region of Gilgit, the people of Gilgit region, they are called Dards. Dards. So Dards are, the people of the wider region. So that means the people of Gilgit, Hunza, Nagar, Chitral, Yasin, they are generally called Dards. So, and this region is generally called Dardistan. And there were at 3 places where in 1853 Dogras faced attacks by the Dards. So on the bank of the Gilgit River, about 1,000 Dogras were killed, and about 100 to 200 of them were taken as slaves. And there were 2 other garrisons, including one in the Gilgit fort. Again, the Dogras were killed. About 300 of them were killed in one garrison, and a few of them were enslaved. And something very important and tragic happened at the Gilgit fort, that the Dards attacked and they killed everyone. So in the Gilgit fort at that point of time, the Dogra army actually also consisted of Gurkhas. So Gurkhas, like they were employed in various garrisons in the subcontinent, including by the British as well. And they had a practice that they would carry their families along with them, or wherever they are, even in the war front. So in the Gilgit fort at that point of time, you also had the presence of Gurkha families. So that means women and children were also present. So when the Durds attacked them, they actually killed everyone except for one woman, one wife of a Dogra, for Gurkha soldier, who actually managed to jump into the river that was flowing nearby. And through Indus, it is said, it is documented that she actually managed to cross Indus by, holding on to the tail of a cow. And she managed to reach the Dogra Maharaja at that point of time. And there are records about her because she was a state pensioner till the end of her life. And she was the sole witness of this massacre that happened in 1853. Now, after that, for about 8 years, the Dogras didn't do anything. So 1860, when the Dogras were ruled by the second Dogra Maharaja, that is Ranbir Singh, the Dogras decided to take the Gilgit fort again. So in 1860, the Dogra forces marched, and after a period of 7 years, they took back the Gilgit fort. And from 1860 till 1947, the Dogras then never left the Gilgit fort. Now, strangely, what happens at this point of time, and this laying of context was important for us to understand the importance of Hoshiara Singh and who he was, and the context in which his story is embedded. Around this time, after the Dogras came back to the Gilgit fort in 1860, two Dogra messengers, they were on their way to buy horses in Badakhshan. Badakhshan is what is in today's Afghanistan. And they were passing through this territory called Yasin. And they were looted and they were ill-treated. Now this, enraged the Dogras. And in 1863, the Dogras sent their punitive forces to this region, and the Battle of Yasin took place. Now, what's very important about all these territories is that you have Gilgit, and all these are further extreme frontiers in the northern frontier region. So Yasin. So Yasin is, so if they were passing from Yasin into Badakhshan, that is Afghanistan, you can well understand that there would have been a route from there, into Afghanistan. Yasin is very important even today because the geography is the same, the Trans-Himalayan region is the same, mountain passes are the same. Yasin is important because it has a high altitude pass which links the Indus Valley to the Oxus Basin. So Oxus is the Amu Darya, which irrigates the Central Asian countries as well as Afghanistan. So Yasin only has that, that pass through which from Indus Basin you can actually go to the Oxus Basin. And that's been the case since ancient history. And it is the case even today when China and Pakistan are building the China-Pakistan economic corridor. Now comes General Hoshiara Singh. General Hoshiara Singh led a force called Ram Gol Platoon. So Ram Gol Platoon, he was leading this Ram Gol Platoon in the Battle of Yasin, which took place in the spring of 1863. And he came along with 3,000 sepoys and 2,000, 3,000 more sepoys, chiefly men from Yusufai, Bonar, Swat and Pathans of that region of Gilgit. They were secretly assembled in Gilgit. And so this force of 5,000 to 6,000 men led by General Hoshiara Singh then attacked Yasin and conquered the territory of Yasin in the extreme frontier of Gilgit. Now it was very difficult to find even this little information about General Hoshiara Singh, and I found it important to lay the context. There is a PhD thesis by somebody called Chauhan, and Chauhan has mentioned this information about Ram Gol Platoon. Immediately after the Battle of Yasin, all records of General Hoshiara Singh's presence disappear from the Dogra history of war. Now here you can see this is the Maduri fort. So what happened in the Battle of Yasin is when the Dogra forces attacked Yasin, the chiefs and the chiefant and the other people, they escaped from there to a fort which was called the Maduri Fort. And then the Dogras attacked the Maduri Fort. A very bloody battle happened over there in which the Dogras killed everyone, including women and children. And nothing was known about this battle until about 7 years. And that also happened in a very, in a very peculiar situation, and we'll come to that later. Now, before that, before we talk about that, there are a few legends about General Hoshiara Singh, which, after I discovered this story, while I visited his home, after that, during my subsequent trips in my region, I met other people, including people from the royal family of the hilly states, which ruled over the region till about early 1830s, when these hilly states were also integrated by Gulab Singh into his larger kingdom. So I had a talk with them. So there is one legend which says that when General Hoshiara Singh was returning from the battle, when the Dogra forces, they returned from the battle of Yasin and they were about to enter Jammu, capital, Gulab Singh's forts, they were on this hillock on the bank of the river Tavi, what is today's downtown Jammu. And if you had to enter Jammu, you had to actually cross the river Tavi. And obviously, there was no bridge over it. And the region on the other side was a thick forest, and there was some kind of a gateway over there. So when the forces entered after their victory, through this gateway, certain bad airs were created about General Hoshiara Singh, by people, in the court. So he was actually manipulated, and the manipulations were so bad that eventually it was decided that he would be killed. Now, the actual factual details about these incidents are not available. And so it was decided that he would be killed by the cannon. And when he was tied to the cannon actually turned towards the manipulators. And so more rumors and more stories were spread about General Hoshiara Singh that, he was a Devi worshipper, so he's protected by the Devi and stuff like that. But in those days of kingdom states, like today we have nation states, but those days were the time of kingdom states and warring kingdom states who were constantly fighting with each other for territory. Anybody who was responsible for winning an important, prominent battle would immediately rise in power and rank. And if you look at Gulab Singh, he was also a warrior in Sikh Maharaja Ranjit Singh's court. And he gained prominence just by fighting battles for him. Then Gulab Singh had another warrior called General Zorawar Singh. We know more about General Zorawar Singh, and we know that he was Gulab Singh's ablest warrior, and he won Ladakh for Gulab Singh. Now, the difference between, while General Zorawar Singh is remembered, nothing much is known about General Hoshiara Singh. The difference between two people, and I think it's important to talk about it. General Zorawar Singh won Ladakh, and he is known as the Napoleon of India because he took the territory of India then beyond the traditional boundary of India. He crossed the Himalayas and he went into the Trans-Himalayan region, into the Kailash region, Mansarovar, where he eventually, in the Battle of Toyo, he got killed. But that point of time, during the mid-19th century, when it was the peak of the Great Games, that is, this entire region of Indian subcontinent's northern frontier was sandwiched between the British Empire and the Russian Empire, and both were fighting for influence in this region. General Zorawar Singh, Dogra army, they were very competent. They were the victorious armies during that point of time when this great game was happening. General Zorawar Singh was killed. So he never returned back to the kingdom. If he would have returned back, obviously he would have been more powerful and maybe he would have been seen as a threat, by other warriors in the garrison. However, General Hoshiara Singh returned, and therefore he was manipulated, and that is how it happened in, warring states. And his family alleges that General Hoshiara Singh was after that slowly poisoned. and that is how he died. He was in a hospital at that point of time after the battle. A hospital was set up in Udhampur, and the family alleges that he was being treated over there when he was slowly poisoned and killed. And all records of him were destroyed. So nothing is available about General Hoshiara Singh. But there are a few legends in the place, where his home is in, around our village. Like, for example, there is a legend about him carrying a cannon uphill. So it is believed that in one of the wars, I exactly don't know which war, the cannon was being carried uphill by the horses. And one of the horse, it fell down, and Hoshiara Singh actually carried the cannon on his shoulders. About 55 years ago, in my village, an exhibition was organized on General Hoshiara Singh, where his clothes, his weapons, and various other personal objects belonging to him were exhibited. So, General Hoshiara Singh actually existed. You can see this Google map. This is just to show you his journey. So you can see here this small dot between Pathankot and Dalhousie. So this is the region where my ancestral region is, where my ancestors lived in that village. So this is the region from where he came, which is about 2,700 feet above sea level. And the Jammu capital was about 1,000 feet above sea level. From there, if you have to travel to Srinagar, now mind you, there were no roads, there were no advanced means of transport, there was no airway. So Srinagar, you had to actually trek to Srinagar or go on horses on Srinagar, which was 6,000 feet. And from there, Gilgit was on an average 13,000 feet above sea level. So Dogras were extremely competent armies of high altitude warfare, and that is why they were able to survive in such inhospitable, unforgiving region. And they were a progeny of the wars. The Dogras were a progeny of the wars. The northern frontiers for the past 1,000 years, except for few pocket periods here and there, they've always faced wars. So just imagine in the past 75 years itself, we have faced 4 wars on our western borders, and we had faced a major war on the eastern border, including the recent Galwan conflict. So now 7 years after General Hoshiara Singh passed away, a British explorer named George Hayward, who was a former British soldier, but he had left the British Army, and he was also a Royal Geography Society member. He was actually a gold medalist from there. He set off to explore this great game region. He set off to explore the origin of the river Oxus or the Amur Darya. So the only way to go over there was obviously first through Srinagar. You camp at Srinagar and then you go to Gilgit, and then from Gilgit you go to Yasin, and from that through Yasin, through the Thawi mountain pass, you actually into the Oxus basin. And George Hayward, when he reached Yasin, he befriended few people in Yasin. He was an independent explorer at that point of time. That means that the British were not supporting him, which also means that the Dogras were not supporting him, because the Dogras and the British were allied at that point of time. And in the territory of Yasin, he, after 7 years, met people who, were the victims of the 1863 war. He also visited the Maduri fort, where he actually counted, the skulls and the skeletons. He counted, hundreds of them, including the skulls of women and children. And he wrote a letter to an English newspaper in Kolkata, which then became the only record, but it's a one-sided record, of the Battle of Yasin of 1863. And that became a diplomatic embarrassment for the British and the Dogras at that point of time. But surprisingly, George Hayward, during his journey, was beheaded. He was himself killed. And a travel writer, Tim Henningham, about a decade ago, he wrote a book about him. It is called Murder in the Hindu Kush, where Tim actually retraced his journey. He went through the path through which George Hayward went. And he has investigated the various hypotheses that existed about his killing, and he hasn't been able to conclude anything. So the book is actually about these hypotheses, and it actually is an indication of the kind of great game competition, the great game rivalry that existed in that region at that point of time. Now, what's common between George Hayward and General Hoshara Singh? Both George Hayward and General Hoshara Singh today, you actually do not know who killed them. They're both somehow linked with Yasin. They're both linked with these extreme northern frontiers of Gilgit, which today are very, very geostrategic place. It's a very geostrategic place today. And we can both say that they both are part of the great game blood-stained canvas. Coming back to General Hoshara Singh, this is a picture of General Hoshara Singh's grandson Zialdar Anand Singh as seen in his ancestral home. So this was a picture in his bathak, as you know, living rooms are called in the Shivalik Dogra Hills. The family believes that there is a picture of General Hoshara Singh at the headquarters of Jack Rifles, the infantry regiment of the Indian Army, whose origin lies in the state forces of Dogra Kingdom. But I haven't yet been able to, find his picture. Now, the third aspect that we can study through General Hoshara Singh's story are the warrior traditions of the Shivalik Hills, the warrior traditions of the Dogras. Now, you can see these pictures here. First, if you see this picture of the trident and those few chain-like objects that you can see, those things in my region, they are known as matas or devis. So, many families have it. In fact, my family has it. So my ancestral home has this enshrined in a, in a little temple that is embedded in the wall. And these are called matas, so they are important. Anything important that happens in the family, first an offering is done to the mata. But if you look at what it is a kind of totem. It is actually some kind of iron chains. But probably the tradition is, not really known to what exactly these things are, what they signify. People really don't know about it. But I have specifically found these things in the Dogra heartland and not anywhere else. So when I went to Hoshara Singh's temple, which was in his home, where his wife over 160 years ago started that Akhanda Jyoti, the deity enshrined or the Devi enshrined was this kind of a thing. Now, this is not from his temple. This is actually another picture which I took somewhere else. Hoshara Singh's temple is alive. So worship still happens over there. And I didn't find it, it was not dignified for me to actually take that picture. So just to show you what it is, I have got that picture. Plus, his family told me that Hoshara Singh used to carry 11 shaligrams in his pocket, and he used to carry a totem of this Devi in silver in his turban. So now we will, later, put these pieces of puzzles together and see where it leads us. On the right, you can see this temple. This is the temple of Machel Mata, which is in a region of Jammu called Padar. And the family links General Hoshara Singh with this temple. They say that General Hoshara Singh was somehow connected with the consecration of the Devi in this temple. However, I haven't been able to check these facts, so I do not have additional sources. This is purely based on the information that the family gave me. Now, interestingly, this is all I knew about General Hoshara Singh. However, a couple of months ago in one of the Sangam talks, I met Gurudev Nidar Singh Nihang, who has a website called Sanatan Shastra Vidya, and I think he has given a couple of talks on, he has given a couple of talks on Sangam. So after the talk, I just went to him and I told him General Hoshara Singh's story, and I told him, the temple that I've witnessed, the practice that I witnessed, because whatever Gurudev Nidar Singh Nihang was talking about, it resonated a lot with me. He talked about the warrior traditions, and he said that the Gandhara region was the capital, the intellectual capital of ancient India. And he said various knowledge traditions. It actually, originated from the ancient Gandhara region, including various warrior traditions. And some of these warrior traditions that he named was like the Pashupati warrior tradition, the Bhairava warrior tradition, and he also talked about a warrior tradition which worships Guru Gorakhnath. And he talked about people called Vartyas, people who had taken vows and they moved from one place to another, and they were the proponents of these Shastra Vidyas. And these Shastra Vidyas were a science in themselves. They were very profound, they were very unique. Now, when I had a one-to-one interaction with Gurudev Nidar Singh Nihang, and I told him General Hoshiara Singh's story, and I repeated the same things that I have given in this presentation. And when I told him that, see, Hoshiara Singh used to carry shaligrams, and immediately Guru Nidar Singh Nihang, he reached his pocket and he took out shaligrams. And he said like this, and I said yes. And I was really astonished because he is a Nihang. And then he pointed at his turban and he said, was he also using something like this on his turban? I said no, because Nidar Singh ji has something like a trident on his turban, which shows the lineage from which he comes. But Hoshiara Singh was actually using a totem of the Devi. So there's a difference over there. So which means that the warrior tradition which Hoshiara Singh was following was a concrete warrior tradition, was unique. It has its origin in the northern western Himalayan hills only, probably, in the, it is one of the ancient warrior traditions, but details about it are not known to me, and this is all I knew. But certainly people who keep shaligrams in their pockets are Vartyas, because each shaligram is a vow. It stands for a particular religious vow that you take. So certainly it is for sure that General Hoshiara Singh was a Vartya. He was following one particular school of Sanatan Shastra Vidya. What school it was, I do have my hypothesis, but I don't want to share it right now until and unless I, do my investigation. As I discovered General Hoshiara Singh's story, which was exactly the way I have described the story here, I accidentally discovered his story. I never thought that I would discover the story of a Dogra warrior this way, and somebody who's forgotten, and somebody, there's some kind of a tragedy involved in this story. There was an intellectual crisis that I faced. Because when I am documenting stories of people from the northern frontiers under my series Kashmir to Haridwar, one of my main objective is that I should be able to dig into the customs, the traditions, the skills, the competence, the genius of these people, and I should be able to understand what is it that we need to carry forward. What is it that signified this region? What was special about this region? So when I look at General Hoshiara Singh, on one hand you can see that he was an able Dogra warrior, that he was responsible for a very important victory. He signified certain warrior traditions which were very unique. But on the other hand, he seems to be the victim of some kind of, power manipulations that happened at that point of time. And I have found the same narrative in many stories that I discover in the northern frontiers, including the story of my great-grandfather, about whom I have talked in the first talk. So when I discover his story, the only thing I come to know is, oh, these were his enemies within the court, or, within the community, and, they were responsible for this harm, that harm, and similar things about other stories that I'm discovering. And I feel that this is a very big crisis for us, because there is a very prominent victimhood trap in the narration of these stories. And now this kind of a narrative has two latches. First of all, these kind of narratives, it blames the system, it blames the situation, or it blames the history. Or second, it blames the victim. And it robs you of the idea of the discretion that you are your own master and you can lead your life through constructivism and positivity. And why I felt that I should discuss this intellectual crisis that I personally faced doing this story, because propaganda mongers actually enslave us through this victimhood trap. You know, even today, you can actually find pieces, selective pieces in certain press from across the border, which only talk about one war of the Dogras, where Dogras are portrayed as brutal, as ruthless, but those stories don't talk about what happened before the war, what happened after the war, what was the context, what was the wider history. So when a specific chunk of history is taken out and portrayed as the only story, there is a propaganda behind it. And why we fall prey to it is because of the sense of victimhood that we have. But if you look at all these special people who were either warriors or scholars or whatever they have done in their life in that moment in history, you find that they were extremely competent, they were genius, and they had contributed a lot to their society at that point of time. So their stories must actually talk about those specialties from which we can learn and the competence and the genius that we can carry forward. And I somewhere feel that this entire region of northern frontier, it actually suffers from this victimhood trap. There's a very big victimization. So narratives in the future, when we talk about these stories, narrative is very important. The human world was always controlled by narratives of conquest and kingdoms. And the dictum of the strongest always rules exist even today, whether we like or we dislike. However, I believe the world today needs a new meaning of strength, a strength that's derived from visions and aspirations for greater good, moral upstanding, and development. And this strength is cultivated inside first and is reinforced through education. The desolate regions that became a great game arena between the British and the Russian, and that continues with China's expansionist agendas today, need these new meanings of strength. They need a new meaning. I'm sure you have many questions. This story was a shared discovery and probably will continue to be more so. I hope that these stories feed more self-discovery in the region and inspire us to come out of the trap of victimhood and discover new narratives of positivity, development, and constructivism. Thank you.